Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Mark Borstein. I'm the CTO of Tremolo Security, co-author of okay, Kubernetes, an Enterprise Guide, third edition. Thank you for joining us again. We're coming into the home stretch. I think this might actually be our second to last lab show. Um, yeah, so we've been spending several weeks on Chapter 19. Scott, unfortunately, my illustrious co-author, had something he had to do and will not be able to join us today. Yeah, if you're out there, please leave a comment, say hello, ask questions. Love talking to folks. I will love to point out my festive T-shirt combining two of my favorite things. Star Wars and Hanukkah. My wife found this shirt and got for me as a Hanukkah present, so I thought I'd share with everybody. Anybody out there who's celebrating, Hanukkah Sameach. Um, we are talking about GitLab and Harbor. Um, they're two pretty critical components in the dev platform we built in Chapter 19, and we deploy it and we kind of talk about it and we show how it interacts, but we don't really talk about those components themselves. So like last week, we talked about Argo CD, we gave it some love. This week, we're going to talk about GitLab and we're going to talk about Harbor. Both tools were used for really important functions. So GitLab we used as our Git repository. We also used it as our workflow engine. So this was a big change from the second edition, the first edition and the second edition, where we used Tecton. Tecton's fine, but it hasn't gotten the adoption, it hasn't gotten the love from the community that kind of thought it would in the beginning, being tied to Knative and serverless the way it was. It was included in OpenShift as their workflow engine to replace Jenkins. But beyond that, it really hasn't gotten that much adoption. So we decided to go with GitLab, GitLab workflows, in addition to GitLab as a Git repository. So we'll talk a little bit about what GitLab looks like and kind of some of the gotchas. Why didn't we go with GitHub? Right? That's the big one out there. That's the big name. And wouldn't have required anything to deploy. Well, we don't want you to have to sign up for anything. And even though you can get a GitHub organization completely free, and this would have worked just fine with that, decided we wanted to kind of show what it looks like to have to build these things out and to integrate them on-prem. And then the second component was Harbor. So Harbor is our OCI repository. It started off as a container registry, but you can use it for more. So for instance, we don't in this lab, but we use it. I've got customers who use it to not just store containers, but you can also store like Helm charts, treat them as artifacts using OCI. So lots of things that you can do there. So we're going to look at that as well. Why don't we dive right into it? I'm going to go ahead and share up my screen. And there we go. So I'm going to log in. I'm going to start off logged in as a super user. So let's take a quick look at GitLab. And we're going to go over to GitLab and we're going to sign in using SSO. It's Open Unison. So now we're signed into SSO with Open Unison. You can see that we've got some options here. We've got projects, and we're a member of one project, and then groups. So the first thing to understand about GitLab is that when they talk about groups in GitLab, they're talking about groups of projects. They're not talking about groups of people. So this is kind of more akin to like an organization in GitHub, if you've ever used GitHub. It's not a team in GitHub. That's kind of a different thing. Groups are for projects, they're not for people in GitLab. Which I'll tell you, when I was building out this automation, getting this to work, that really threw me for a loop. That was one that I had a hard time kind of getting my head around, was this idea that groups are for projects, not for people. And then when you go into a group, so like here's our cluster operations group, and it's got a single project, cluster operations. And it's pretty standard, Git repository, nothing crazy there. One of the things I will say I love about GitLab is it's got this built-in IDE. So like you can go to edit and open up the web IDE, and like you've got code, like this is Visual Studio Code, right? Just running in your browser in your cluster. Like I think that's actually really cool the way that they did that. And you could get that same kind of feel where you've downloaded the code and you edit it and you can commit it. But yeah, this is Visual Studio Code, but in my browser. I don't have to download anything. I don't have to run anything. So I think that's pretty cool. That's a really neat way to be able to edit files and to edit things. Um, One of the things uh, that's different about GitLab versus GitHub is in GitHub you have pull requests. In GitLab you have merge requests. Now this is the community edition of GitLab. Realize that GitLab's a company; they need to make money, and we totally get that. They have the community edition, and then um, they have the commercial editions. Um, the commercial editions give you more capabilities. Excuse me. And like one of the areas is with like merge requests, where if you were to create a merge request, um, it just goes like there's no, as long as you're allowed to do it, it just goes right through. There's no, like, you can add an approval, but an optional approval, which is kind of weird to me. To make it a required approval, you have to have the paid edition, which I get. You know, they deserve to make money too. Um, they also have issues, very similar to GitHub, right? So we don't really do a lot with them, but they're here, right? Like you can totally create a issue, and very similar if you've ever used GitLab or GitHub. So nothing crazy there. The other area that GitLab has, and I'm actually going to sign out as this user, and let's go ahead and sign out entirely so we can sign back in as Jay Jackson. Go log into GitLab. And so Jay Jackson's got different projects. So I'm going to go to my application over here. And we did jobs. Yeah. So one of the things that GitLab has that, so GitLab from an approach has its own approach of it's a monolith. Um, it's got a bunch of different services under the hood that we can take a look at, but at the end of the day, GitLab wants this to be your one-stop shop for developers. So whether it's workflows, code storage, issue management, I mean it's issue boards. There's a wiki in here. Uh, you know, all sorts of crazy stuff. Like this is meant to be kind of that one-stop shop. I don't like that approach personally. There's some areas where I think it's great. I think in a lot of enterprises, what you're going to find is some of the functionality will be used, but because of the way organizations are siloed, uh, just because the feature's there doesn't mean that they're going to want you to use it. So, like, I find it not unusual to see a GitHub or a GitLab deployed inside of an organization, but they will use workflows. They have another tool for workflows. They have another team that does workflows. So they don't want you to use the workflows, and they turn it off. And it's just, I mean, like even here, right? Artifacts. We could. I'm almost positive. Like, let me double check. GitLab OCI registry. Like I'm pretty. Yeah. It's GitLab is an OCI. We could have skipped Harbor entirely. right? And we could have just used GitLab for our OCI registry. We didn't because we wanted to show how all these pieces fit together. And ultimately, because in most enterprises, we're an enterprise book, we talk about enterprises. Most enterprises, organizations are very heavily siloed. And so just because a piece of technology can do something doesn't mean that that's the way that the organization wants it to work. Um, whenever you get into a situation where somebody is using, um, a monolith like GitLab, it's really not unusual to get people to say, well, we're not going to use the workflow, or we're not going to use the OCI, or we're not, because we have a different team who that's their responsibility, and it's outside of our purview, right? And so that becomes a management issue, not a technology issue. Um, so we've got our jobs here. Let's take a quick look. And GitLab jobs are basically bash scripts. I mean, when all is said and done, like if we let's go back and look at the actual application, and here's our pipeline. And it's basically each task is, I mean, yes, there are some native tasks, but for the most part, it's a set of bash scripts. Kelsey Hightower, I think, said something like you can boil down almost a distributed architecture into a series of bash scripts. Um, so we do our build, and this is where we run the Kaneko executor. Now, each of these jobs, what are called jobs in GitLab, are actually containers, right? So now we ran this several weeks ago, but if we were looking inside of our cluster at the time, we would have seen that there was a container launched to do this build, right? There was a Kaneko container launched to do it. Now, think about that from an extensibility standpoint. Well, if you have a type of job that you need done that GitLab doesn't do natively, well, cool, build a Docker container and away you go. Um, so the first thing we did was a build, right? Now, because it's a container, there is nothing stored. You need to store these things some places. And so you need to allocate, if you think about it, you need to allocate mount points, you need to allocate things like that. So we ran Kaneko. Now, because we're using a external registry, we didn't have to maintain that information. We just pushed it out into our harbor. But the first thing I'll point out here that's kind of interesting is uh, this, we're getting the SHA. And then did we do, trying to see here, did we, I guess we just made it easy. I was trying to see how we were doing the secret, because we do have a secret in here for pushing into Harbor. I'm trying to remember how we did that. How did we do that? Let's see. I think if we go into deploy, no, build pipelines, maybe. I don't remember. I'll have to double check that one. But artifacts, security configuration. Oh no, that didn't work. Oh, go back to GitLab. Go back to our project. Let's go to our app. Yeah, I don't remember where we actually ended. When we go through the open use and deployment workflows, we'll be able to see. Maybe did I do it in CI/CD? It's probably in CI/CD. Variables. CA. Okay, here we go. see here, CA certificate, config JSON. Okay. I don't think I can view it. Oh, here we go. So this is the, okay, so it's kind of hard to see. Let's see if I can make it bigger. So when we go through Open Unison in the new year and how the Open Unison implementation worked, we'll show how this got done, and we'll talk about this a little bit when we get to Harbor. We set up a robot account so that our jobs could talk to Harbor securely. And we'll talk about robots here in a second. Now, interesting, starting with 134, where you can use Kubernetes service accounts to talk to your container registry. And so we didn't include that process, but in theory, that would eliminate the need for these type of robot accounts. So, but the point here is that our workflow is built so that it can talk to Harbor securely. And so we come back here to our code. We come back here to our pipeline. So we built, make this a little bit bigger. So we built our image using Kaneko. Kaneko is a project from Google. I have to double check. Last time I looked, they were in maintenance mode. They were having issues getting folks to be able to help maintain it, which is really unfortunate. It's a great little project. I suspect we could probably swap this out with Red Hat's Builda, which if Kaneko has gone away, I suspect is what we'll end up doing is replacing it with Builda. Builda is a series of tools from Red Hat to run Docker containers and build Docker containers without a Docker daemon. Because the big issue with having a Docker daemon, especially in a build system, is that means you need to have access to the socket. That's a privilege, right? That's a privileged container just to do a build. That seems a little silly, just to make a giant tarball. So Builda is a tool that's been around for 4 or 5 years to replace Docker as a CLI tool. So I suspect we'll probably end up replacing it with that in the next edition. So that's the first script. So that generates our container, pushes it into Harbor. We'll take a look at Harbor in a few minutes. Our next part is our deployment job. Now, the deployment job, we're doing GitOps here, right? So deployment in GitOps is a little bit different than deployment in just calling the API, right? Because I don't want to call the Kubernetes API and say, here's here's a new tag, right? Like that defeats the purpose of your source of truth being Git. And so we do it a little bit differently. Instead of calling the API, which is something we would have done before, we say, okay, no, we're going to go ahead and pull down our deployment and run a kube control patch. So that's what we're doing here. We're connecting to GitLab over SSH. We are cloning our repo in dev, running a patch where we're changing the image to the image with our short commit SHA. So that way we have something to tie it to. You know, we're tying the build together. Add it, commit it, push it, and then we're just hanging out, waiting for Argo CD to pick it up. And so in order to do that, now we didn't do this at the time. I'll have to look to see if they can. I believe you can do a GitHub. I don't think you can do a GitLab, where you're not doing things with SSH anymore. You're doing things with the GitHub CLI and GitHub Actions. GitLab doesn't have that concept yet, unfortunately. So you're still doing things with personal access tokens and SSH keys. Now, GitLab does have a identity for every single workflow. You can use that when talking with external systems. And in fact, I did write a blog. I think it was last year, end of last year, end of 2024, about using the identity of your workflow system when talking to Kubernetes clusters. So that is there, but being able to use something like a GitHub app that isn't quite there yet. So that's GitLab, and it's a great little system, right? Like it's a lot to run. When we look at what is running under the covers, let's go ahead and log back in. I'm actually going to log out, log in as an admin, so we can take a look at what is running here under the covers. So we're going to go to our control plane, go to our dashboard. So if we look at what GitLab is running from a pod standpoint, it's a lot. Kind of the important ones are it's got a Redis database, right? So it's got at least 2 stateful sets in here. Let me look. It's got a Redis database, and it's also got a PostgreSQL database. We just deploy it with its own Postgres. I will tell you, I've done upgrades on this and have lost my database completely. So I would definitely be a little careful about that. But the chart out of the box is pretty self-contained. It's got its own Redis, and I forget what this Gitly is. It has something to do with the runners when you do workflows. The big one here is the web service. This is what the web UI is. This renders your web UI is the web service. And then also, I think it hosts the SSH. Might host the SSH. Or maybe it's Shell. But because it's got an SSH server in there for being able to push and commit code, which is kind of important. Now, because we're running on Talos, we didn't have to worry about conflicts because Talos doesn't have SSH. So that's great. Now, when it comes to how we actually deployed, let's take a look at our Pulumi code, GitLab. So we had to deploy GitLab in 2 phases. Make sure, keep an eye on up here. We had to deploy GitLab in 2 phases. If you go back to our first episode, or I guess it was our second episode for this chapter when we rolled it out, first we rolled out GitLab, then we had to set up a GitLab runner and get that up and running. That was because our infrastructure uses a self-signed CA. We needed to do that because it's an enterprise, right? Like we weren't going to sign up for Let's Encrypt to do this. And for some reason with self-signed CAs, the runners can't be it's really weird. I could never get it to work. Maybe somebody from GitLab is watching out there in TV land. They can tell me what I did wrong. But everything I saw said you had to run the GitLab runner separately from GitLab. So when we go ahead and deploy GitLab, the first thing we do now, obviously, we create a namespace. And then we need to create a SSO secret. So GitLab, under the covers, it's Ruby on Rails. And then it's got its own SSO system. So before you roll out GitLab, it's much easier to configure the secret with all of your SSO configuration in there. Now everything goes in as a secret because, hey, look, you got this client secret here, right? So it's best stored as a secret. This could obviously, we were using Vault, so in theory, we could have stored this in Vault and then let Vault sync it in through ESO, but we just decided to go with it directly So we created inside here, inside of our Pulumi program. And then once we do that, we got that deployed. We have a CA cert, and then we generate a bunch of certificates. Now, GitLab will deploy with Cert Manager built in. We already have Cert Manager, so I said, no, don't do that. So we configure it to deploy a bunch of wildcards. And then we get to the real fun part, which is actually deploying GitLab. So I don't like running things manually. I also don't like building out manifests. And GitLab's Helm chart is really complex. Uh, I don't think you can deploy GitLab via Argo, as an example. At least I've never had luck doing it. It's a really complex chart that just doesn't render properly with Argo. So we configure our Helm values via JSON, right? We set it all, put it all together, figure it all out. We're using Nginx. We don't want Cert Manager, and we don't automatically install Git-Route. We did that manually. We grab the charts, run the release, and then if we have a token, so if you go back to the second video that we did, we deployed everything, we generated our GitLab runner, we created our token, then we went ahead and reran with that token a GitLab runner chart. So that's how the runner figures out how to interact with Kubernetes to launch your workflows. And that's it. And then Pulumi did the rest, right? So that's how we rolled out GitLab. I really like GitLab. It's great. It works well. Getting it set up was pretty straightforward. So that's the first part. So the next part, let's talk about Harbor. The super exciting world of container registries. So here's Harbor. Harbor is a project that was originally part of the VMware Tanzu system. I don't know what they call it now. I know Broadcom's renamed everything. It is a CNCF project. Actually, I'll double check that. I'm almost positive Harbor is CNCF. CNCF. Yes, okay. So Harbor is a CNCF project. And it's got a good score. It's got a lot of people, software value, 40 million. Really? Okay. I'd be curious to see how they figure that out, but that's a whole other conversation. So there are a lot of people, I am one of them, that is very wary of anything coming out of Broadcom and VMware right now. They have been canceling, they've been changing things. So I've been wary of recommending anything that came out of the old Tanzu stack. We do it earlier with Valero. Harbor seems to have enough community behind it. That's pretty safe. The other one that's pretty popular is Quay from Red Hat, formerly. Oh God, what the heck is the name of the company that Red Hat bought way back when? Tecton, Dex. Oh gosh, I'm completely drawing a blank. But anyway, so also a container registry similar to Harbor. I don't remember why we chose Harbor over Quay, to be honest. I don't remember. I don't know if there was a really good reason or not. But we just decided to go with Harbor. But it's a great OCI registry. When we say OCI, we don't just mean Docker containers. OCI is a way to store artifacts. A Docker container at the end of the day is a tarball of tarballs, right? It's really not that complicated. So when, a little history lesson, Docker comes onto the scene in, 2010, 2011, and sets the entire IT world on fire. And so other companies start to get in the game, and Docker starts making formats and saying, "Whoa, we cannot put all of our eggs in a Docker basket. We have got to have some standards around how we move these repositories around." And so everybody got together and they came up with a standard called OCI. And what does OCI stand for? What does OCI stand for? Probably get into a lot of trouble doing this. It came up. Oversee. No, that's not right. At least not in this context. Let's see. Commission. No, no. Okay. Docker. Open Container Initiative. That makes total sense. So it's a way of standardizing not just how you store the artifact, but also how you move the artifact, what those APIs look like. So that basically turned your container registry into an anything registry, right? You could store anything as an OCI as long as both sides agree to the OCI format. What goes into those buckets isn't super important. So you can, in fact, push Helm charts to Harbor. You know, if I'm a big fan of doing this, by the way. You know, don't treat your Helm charts as code. Treat your Helm charts as artifacts. You know, treat your values file as code, but treat your Helm charts as artifacts, and then push those artifacts into Harbor. What's great about Harbor is it's multi-tenant. So you can set up different, they're called libraries or projects rather. So like we have the My App project here now. I'm signed in as them Mosley, so I have access to everything. But you go into your project, you have different repositories, and you do all sorts of stuff in here. I think this is really cool, where you can go ahead and scan. Make that a little bit bigger. You can scan it's got built-in Trivy, I think, is the default one for scanning and for SBOMs, and it'll tell you like this is the container. We've got 17 critical vulnerabilities in our little Python script. So maybe you don't want to. I don't know. I will say always be careful about what comes out of these, you know, out of the scanners in general. They tend to be a little aggressive. It'll tell you if it's signed, and it'll even generate an SBOM for you. And you can see kind of what's in that SBOM, which I think is pretty cool, where you got all that information at the tip of your fingers here. A lot of GPL in here. So that's what it looks like when you're using it as a container registry. Now, something that's important is we have M. Mosley here, and we can go to our user profile and we can grab a CLI secret and it's a temporary secret. I have found that this temporary secret that gets generated for you doesn't work great with SSO. It tends to expire when your SSO session expires. So I generally don't use it. What you typically end up doing is you create something called a robot account. And here you can see we created robot accounts. It's mainly designed for our workflows. But in this instance, I often end up creating a robot account for myself or for users because unfortunately the the SSO secret that it generates for you expires really quickly when you're using short-lived keys tokens the way that we do. So I go with the robot accounts. Now, robot accounts themselves are nothing, super crazy. They're just accounts with permissions, right? That let you interact with Harbor. So probably in the fourth edition we'll figure out how to do this, but I know Harbor is actively adding support for being able to um, validate a service account, Kubernetes service account. I don't know if that's, they do a token exchange to get a robot account, which wouldn't surprise me. But there's got to be some mechanism there. So that's something I think we'll be covering in the fourth edition, assuming that we do one. Although I will say, based on sales, I have a hard time believing Packet won't be up for letting us do a fourth edition. So thank you, everybody. As an actual deployment, if we go ahead and check it out, Harbor. So Harbor has a lot. It's got a lot going on in here. Lots of stateful sets, which makes a lot of sense. It's a container registry. It's gonna store a lot of stuff. Now we're storing everything locally here in the lab using host local path provisioner. But anything will work here, right? You don't have to go too crazy. It's got a Redis, it's got a database, and it looks like Trivi's stateful set as well. And then you've got, if you go over to deployments, we've got a bunch of stuff here around the front end, job service, etc. Deploying Harbor was pretty straightforward. It supports SSO, right? So if I come over here to Matt Mosley, or if I go to configuration, I think, yeah. So pretty straightforward. OIDC works great. We set it up, and we'll take a look at that real quick in the in the Plumi program. Right, it was all automated. That part was pretty straightforward to get working. So let's do that now, actually. So that was GitLab. So let's take a look at Harbor. And the code itself is honestly really straightforward. There's not a lot of there. We've got a CA cert. We generate an OIDC secret. The one thing that we had to kind of be careful on, or where we ended up having to break things up, is there was no way to specify a secret. Like we could specify it as part of a deployment, but we couldn't there was no sequenced way to tell the Pulumi provider for Harbor, which I'm almost 99% sure is a Terraform bridge generated provider. The Harbor admin credential via code. So remember, kids, eventual consistency is a lie. The cloud native Jedi tell you to keep you warm at night. So we had to break it up into multiple steps in order to once the secret got generated, then we had to go ahead and configure it inside of manually inside of our Pulumi project. And then deploying Harbor was just a Helm chart, really. Generated ingress, a little bit of information, like nothing crazy here, right? Where to go find the admin secret. And then once that got set up, that's when we actually started to use the Harbor configuration to set up OIDC. So this config auth is actually directly out of the Harbor configuration program. And in order to do that, we had to connect and to get a password. So so that's Harbor and GitLab, both great systems. I use Harbor in my home lab to store everything and anything, charts, containers, everything. I love it. Works great. Highly recommend. Quay is great too. I just don't have any experience with it, but I've got nothing negative to say about it. I've never heard anything negative about it. Yeah, so no Scott today, so there's no witty banter, and not a lot of folks out in TV land today, probably because we're on the holidays. But we're going to this is going to be our last stream of the year. I will be on vacation next week, so I believe Scott will as well. So we're not going to be here. We will go ahead and do one more stream, I think, for labs. We're going to talk about Open Unison uh, one last time, and going to talk about the workflows and how we actually, we ran the workflows for onboarding a tenant, but we didn't actually walk through them, show what it looked like and what it was going on. So we're going to go ahead and walk through that to wrap up the book. If you are out there in TV land and you've bought the book, please, please, please leave a review on Amazon. It's super important, especially now that we're past the year. Usually these books after about a year, they start to drop down on the charts. I think Enterprise Guide it still has plenty to give. And we're probably not going to start the new edition until this summer, the earliest. So probably going to be at least another 6 to 8 months, even before we start talking about, when a new edition might be released. So there's a lot to get out of this, and I think they're giving it away for like $40 on Amazon. And if you buy the Dead Tree, you get a free copy of the ebook, which is helpful. So anyway, have a happy holiday, everybody. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever holidays you are celebrating. Have a happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2026.